We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to AVRant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H.
Infinite Gary. Gary understands the concept of wide color gamut in theory. He can look at the triangles on the color diagram and understand that the DCI P3 or Rec 2020 is a bigger triangle encompassing more shades of red, green, and blue than Rec 709 triangle. But he tends to evaluate things by looking at actual content. Could we give him an example of a real scene from a real movie that would help him understand what he's really looking for? He's going from a Runco projector that uses an LED light source that supposedly delivers very accurate Rec 709 color. He's upgrading to a JVC projector that uses a lamp and has the option of to put either a DCI P3 color filter at the light path or at the expense of maximum brightness, or stay at Rec 709. Let me say that again because that was confusing to me and I said it. So he has the option of either putting a DCI P3 color filter in the light path, which will be at the expense of maximum brightness. It will dim his image somewhat.
Right.
Or he can stay at Rec 709 color while delivering brighter HDR highlights. So on the actual scene from the actual movie, what's all that going to look like? What are the differences he should be looking for to help him evaluate what settings look best? What you really need is, instead of us telling you an actual movie, because I mean, you could take any HDR movie, you know, with Dolby Vision or whatever that you've got, and
well, Dolby Vision won't help you on a projector, so
that's true. That
won't matter. HDR10.
You can get your HDR10 movie, watch it on your projector, and then somehow try to switch back and forth really, really quick, which of course is never going to happen fast enough for you to actually notice it. I would recommend you look into some sort of demonstration disc, and you can get those. I mean, you can get them from Dolby. You can get them from a bunch of other places. Sometimes you can buy them. A lot of times after places like Cedia, and Cedia just ended, people will be walking around with oodles of those things because they went to Cedia and they pass them out. So it's a matter of finding somebody who's got one, and then inevitably somebody will burn it to something and then post it on, you know, whatever the BitTorrent thingy is that you like the best. You can find it that way.
I suppose.
I don't necessarily suggest that you do that, but you can get those discs. I mean, but what you're looking for here is is a very good question, because you're going from, you know, a smaller triangle to a bigger triangle, which means, yes, you're going to get a lot more colors in there, but how are you going to see them absolutely within one scene? Or, I mean, I imagine he wants to freeze frame it and just look at it and then switch back and forth somehow.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I'll give a few concrete examples, because I mean, I imagine you're now going to be buying some Ultra HD Blu-rays. I think he already got the Oppo Ultra HD Blu-ray player ready to go. So Deadpool is a great example, because you can actually just look at Deadpool's costume.
It's very red.
And that deep shade of red is outside of the Rec 709 gamut. So if you just freeze frame on Deadpool's costume, which he's in the movie plenty for you to do that, if you switch between the Rec 709 setting and the DCI P3 setting, you'll notice that in DCI P3, it's a deeper, richer shade of red for his costume. So that's pretty easily visible. Another great example would be The Martian, the Matt Damon movie, because on there they have the headlamps on his spacesuit.
Right.
So particularly at the beginning of the movie, where they're in the sandstorm that kicks up and they've all got their headlamps on, when you're watching it in HDR, so you could compare the Blu-ray that comes in the Ultra HD Blu-ray package. So if you compare the regular Blu-ray, which is Rec 709 color and standard dynamic range, to the Ultra HD Blu-ray with HDR10 and DCI P3 color, when you compare those two things, you'll notice that in the HDR version with the DCI P3 color, you can clearly see that the headlamps are blue. They have a blue tint to them. On the Blu-ray, they just look white.
Right.
They just plain look white. And if you were to watch it in HDR but in Rec. 709 color, the orange of their spacesuits doesn't look as orange. You still notice that it's orange, but it's not the same deeper shade of orange that you see with the DCI P3 color, and you lose a bit of that blue in their headlamps. So it's a fairly easy thing to spot. You're like, wait a second, those look like real lamps, and they got a blue tinge to them, and they don't in the other versions. Right. And then you've got to get yourself Blade Runner, because that's like a fantastic looking HDR transfer that they've done on that thing. And there, the neon, because there's plenty of neon in Blade Runner, actually looks like neon lights now, instead of just looking like a kind of flat, shade of green and yellow and pink and red like it does on the Blu-ray. Same thing when you switch between DCI P3 color and Rec. 709 color. In DCI P3, in HDR, it's like, that looks like neon, perhaps for the first time that we've seen this movie really looking like actual real live neon lights. So those would be examples I'd point to.
There you go. Vincent Teo put out an interesting YouTube video after his discussions with various manufacturers and reps from the Blu-ray Disc Association at IFA. Or IFA. They were saying how Dolby Vision HDR10 Plus are not in a format war, although Vincent himself doesn't necessarily agree. What do we think?
Yeah.
I think they are trying. They're very much trying to be in a format war. They're pushing it. I don't know that anybody's going to care enough to. Okay. Let me put it to you. Let me give you a concrete example of what I'm talking about. So I am not at home, and my house gets power. My friend's house does not. He's been here plenty, right? So I've got my subwoofers in the bathroom. You guys saw the pictures on Facebook. I took both of my subwoofers and I wedged them into the cubby hole of this little sink. It was sitting on top of a sink up there. And so they were like the highest thing in my house, pretty much. So I was like, my subwoofers are going to make it. They got to make it. Even though I'm sure SVS would send me some more if I asked them to, but still, I didn't want to have to ask. So, and my speakers were, put up high and everything else, and I took all the stuff off the ground. So he calls me and says, so the home theater seems to be working, but I can't really hear anything. I'm like, did you hook up the speakers? He goes, no, they were on the chairs. I just moved them off. I'm like, okay, gonna have to do a little bit more than that. So I explained to him what he needed to do all of that, and so all he's got to do is plug in the inputs from the speaker lines, and then plug in the subwoofers. It's not really that big of a deal. I get here, turn it on. I'm like, one of the speakers are out of phase. Now this guy's watched like at least three movies that I know of in this house, in this theater, after doing this with one of the speakers out of phase. So obviously out of phase that I had to stop and start figuring out which of the speakers was out of phase. Now I still have to rerun Odyssey and all that because all the speakers have changed positions, and I don't know if you put the right subwoofer in the right spot. So the volume dials in the back might be a little bit messed up. So I got to rerun all of that anyways. I'm gonna do that, but I couldn't believe that he could not notice that something sounded weird.
By the way, is just connecting the red binding post of the receiver to the black binding post of the speaker, and the black binding post of the receiver to the red binding post of the speaker. That's all that went on there in terms of wiring out of phase.
In all honesty, it's not really his fault, because I've got like some speaker wire that's like blue on one side and black on the other, and red on one and red on the other, and black on the other. And they should be, but for whatever reason, they're not. I don't know. They're some of them are kind of reversed, and I don't know why they are. So that's just my own fault for being lazy when I was wiring them, or not being able to see very well behind there. When I get the new receiver, which we'll be talking about later, I will endeavor to make things make a little bit more sense in the back of my receiver. So to think that HDR10 and Dolby Vision is going to be some sort of format war like Blu-ray and
HD
DVD was, I think it's ludicrous. I don't think anybody's going to care enough. They're going to be like, is it, HDR10 is mandated, so I will get high dynamic range in some fashion.
Right. That was exactly their point.
All the rest of it's just going to be like, I don't care.
Yeah, their point was this isn't a format war because, okay, so a format war was Betamax versus VHS or
Sure.
Blu-ray versus HD DVD, because if you bought a Blu-ray and put it in an HD DVD player, you got nothing. It didn't
Right.
work. If you bought an HD DVD and put it in a Blu-ray player, you got nothing. It didn't work. They're saying if you buy a disc that has Dolby Vision on it and you put it in a player that doesn't play Dolby Vision, it only plays HDR10 plus, you won't get HDR10 plus, you won't get Dolby Vision, but you will get HDR10. You'll still get an image, it'll still be a high dynamic range, it'll just be static metadata instead of dynamic metadata, and vice versa. You buy a disc that has HDR10 plus, you put it in a player.
Care.
Yeah, you put it in a player that can do Dolby Vision but not HDR10 plus. You won't get Dolby Vision, you won't get HDR10 plus, but you'll still get HDR10. You'll still get HDR, just be static metadata. So they're saying at least there's this common denominator. In all cases, you'll get HDR10 at a minimum, and then beyond that, you might get Dolby Vision or HDR10 plus. Now, it's a tiny bit of a format war in the sense, in my view, in the sense that if you buy a Samsung TV, you can't watch any Dolby Vision content on it. And there are some movies in the streaming services that don't, if you don't have Dolby Vision, it goes to 4K, no HDR at all. That does exist in a handful of the movies that are out there on a couple of the streaming services. So in that case, it's like, well, wouldn't it be nice if my TV just supported all the HDR formats so I don't have to even care about this stupidity? Right? So in that sense, I'm like, I think it's dumb. I don't, like, why even do this? But
I honestly don't think anybody's going to care.
There's a ton of people who will never notice the difference between HDR and SDR. Like, there are a ton of people who just want everything to look eye-searingly bright all the time, and they actually don't like HDR in any form because that tends to make most of the movie look darker.
Right.
Because they're used to dynamic vivid mode on standard dynamic range content that was peaking out at 400 nits and the black level was raised to 50. And they're like, that looks great. Look at how, look, I have to put sunglasses on to watch it. It's fantastic. And then they put in a Dolby Vision disc where everything is set to where it should be. And they're like, I can't see anything. Everything's all dark all the time. HDR is terrible. So that's going to be a lot of people. They certainly aren't going to care about Dolby Vision versus HDR10 plus.
Not a format war, I think, is what it ends up being. So, lastly, Infinite Gary says, some displays offer lookup tables with some projectors even offering a different presets for certain types of screens. What are lookup tables all about, and what adjustments would be made for different projector screens? Well, a lookup table is kind of a database term, basically. And what it is a preset settings that are set in in the memory of your storage of your device, of whatever it is, and whenever you say vivid mode, it says, okay, vivid mode is all of these things. That's a lookup table. It's like brightness here, contrast here, colors here, this, there's the gamma, all of that. And then for these, what we're talking about projectors, what you're talking about is for a certain type of screen, they know there's going to be this type of color shift. Like, so do you have a gray screen? Okay, well, that tells us a certain number of things that we need to do to make the projector look better so that you don't call us and bug us about why it looks bad. Okay.
Yeah, in displays, the lookup tables are typically specifically about color. Mm-hmm. And so you'll notice in a lot of like consumer displays, you might have a color management system, and maybe it'll be a 2-point grayscale adjustment or a 10 or a 20-point grayscale adjustment. And that's saying when you get that percentage stimulus, do this to the colors. Bump up the red a little bit, knock down the blue a little bit, but you're only doing that in 2 or 10 or 20 places. A lookup table gives you the ability to adjust how much color each of the primary colors, red, green, and blue, you're getting for every single value. So in a 10-bit video signal, there are 1,024 values for red, green, and blue. And a lookup table lets you say exactly how much red, green, and blue you should get for every single one of those 1,024 values. So it's super, super detailed for the color. And what you would get if there's presets for certain screens is saying, we know this screen has a certain amount of color shift. When you put this much blue on the screen, you get this much blue back. maybe a little bit too much or not quite enough. So we know we have to boost or cut the amount of blue. As an example, red, green, same thing. There's a little bit of color shift on that screen. We know that. That's a known thing. So we can adjust that in the lookup table. That's what's going on there.
All right. Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.